Hello, 7th graders. This is our first lesson in Chapter 9, 9.1 on radicals. I'm going to go through a quick review on doing and undoing operations. If we start with 9 and we subtract 7, we get 2. How do we undo that subtraction? Well, we do it with addition. We add the 7 back to the 2 and we get the 9 that we started with. If we start with 5 and multiply by 6, of course we get 30. Now how do we undo that multiplication of 6? You know, it's with division. And 30 divided by 6 equals 5. If we start with 3 and square it, we get 9. Now how do you undo the square? We undo it by taking the square root of 9. And the square root of 9 is either 3 or negative 3 because there are actually two solutions. 3 squared equals 9, but negative 3 squared, and that must be in parentheses, also equals 9. Another way to write this statement is that the square root of 9 equals plus or minus 3. These statements are equivalent. But in this book, when you see negative in front of a radical sign, they're looking for the negative root. So the negative of the square root of 9 would equal the negative root, which is negative 3. Without the negative sign, they're looking for the positive root. And that is the standard in this book. An outline of Chapter 9, we are going to go over square roots, real numbers, Pythagorean theorem, Pythagorean triples, special right triangles, trigonometric trig ratios. So fasten your seatbelt, here we go. Evaluating square roots. The square root of 36 is 6 because 6 squared equals 36. The doing and the undoing. We have a negative in front of the square root of 64, so they want the negative root. The negative root of the square root of 64 is negative 8 because negative 8 squared equals 64. When we have a fraction, little tricky, 4/25, we can think of that as the square root 2/5 squared is going to go back to that. Therefore, 2/5 is the square root of 4/25. Decimals, they get a little tricky. To recognize that this is what we call a perfect square. 0.81, what times what is going to give you 0.81? 0.9. So 0.9 is the square root of 0.81. Should not have to use a calculator for those. Remember that every positive number has two square roots. In this text, the negative of the square root of n means they want the negative root of n. Therefore, negative square root 25 is negative 5. Here are some for you to practice, and these, you will have the PDF of this. It's on the next slide, has the answers to that. One thing I do want to go over is perfect squares. Okay. A perfect square is an integer whose square root is an integer. 64 is a perfect square because if you take the square root of it, you get an integer. And you would get plus or minus 8. Please read the first page of 9.1 in your book.